the implications are simply not being appreciated by public and I don't think by politicians. So all of this stuff about tariffs and all of this stuff about the Fed, to me, is way less important than having your finger on the lever of $150 trillion of assets.
What is the nature of the threat to the Fed? I've been reading pieces in the newspaper recently that Trump has been tweeting and making noises about Jerome Powell. He couldn't leave too soon. It'd be too soon, et cetera. He wants a low interest friendly policy from the Fed, and the Fed is worried about inflation. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, so I want to emphasize that there are two challenges to Fed independence. They're related. One in terms of monetary policy, which, as you pointed out, is the setting of interest rates. And the other is in terms of the supervision and regulation of financial institutions. So the one that received a lot of attention this week has to do with the independence of monetary policy and the comments about Jerome Powell. And the issue there is that the Fed was constituted, and we'll come back to this, as an independent institution by Congress. And the president has largely, though there have been exceptions, kept hands off the Federal Reserve. And what Trump and his lawyers are challenging now is their ability, the executive branch's ability, to fire members of the Board of Governors, which includes Powell. And what they're arguing is that that although there was a case almost a century ago that said that the president couldn't fire an agency in which the Congress has said that you could only fire members of the leading staff of an agency unless they didn't perform their job well, not just because you disagreed with them for policy, he's challenging that. The basis of that challenge is that the Constitution mandates that the president faithfully execute the laws that are passed by Congress. And the president is arguing that in order to be able to fulfill his constitutional mandate, he needs to be able to fire the members of agencies who he deems are not faithfully executing the laws of Congress. And one of those agencies is the Federal Reserve. And so this week, the focus has been on the firing of Powell. But there's an other element that was written. It's on the White House website, and it's part of a general movement by the Trump administration, and that is to say, look, you can't really have independent agencies. The Constitution has three branches of government, and that an agency has to be under the purview of one of those branches of government. And since we're talking about agencies that are executing the laws of Congress, those agencies must come under the executive branch for the same reasons I gave. How can the president fulfill his or her constitutional mandate if they can't oversee the actions of these agencies?
This is the administration's argument.
It was the administration's argument, and this will get decided by the Supreme Court. But I want to point out that they are very explicit. That there's no ambiguity that they state that this means that they will have oversight over all financial, supervisory, and regulatory actions and policies. So I want to emphasize this because the assets of financial institutions in the US are about $150 trillion. Now imagine if one person can influence the flow and the flow of credit and the purchase of assets throughout all of these institutions. Which stocks will succeed, which will fail, which companies will get credit, which companies won't, which companies will need to fail, and which companies will thrive.
That would be the most powerful person in the history of the planet.
That's my view. It would be the most powerful person in the history of the planet. Now, it is an elected official. However, that for me, that type of power dwarfs whether you can manipulate the interest rate a little bit here and there, which is
what would he do if he were up to no good with that kind of power?
so I can answer the question, but I do want to preface it by saying I don't know what his intentions are.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not predicting or kind of inside the head or have any inside information about what anybody wants to do.
150 trillion. I mean, that's more than cumulative global GDP.
Yes. And not all of it is, you do have double counting. So, but if you just look up on the Federal Reserve website, what are the total assets of financial institutions? That's the number you'll catch. But there is some double counting. So it doesn't matter. If you made it half that, it wouldn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And
okay, so you don't know what he's intending to do, but
I have no idea what he's intending to do. I have no idea whether he will do anything. But with that much power, let's say you want certain constituencies to have access to low-cost credit. You could easily make that happen. In fact, the financial institutions themselves would be guessing that that's what you want. It may not even have to be explicit. It's like, let's say I'm the president and you're the head of JP Morgan. You know what my interests are. You know I have the power to influence your well-being.
I see. I don't even have to use it.
I could probably get the supervisors to fire you. And so I wouldn't even have to say anything to you.
Yeah.
You would simply act in a way that you think would please me. Let's say there are people that are my enemies. And let's say I wanted to exact retribution. This could all be done in reverse. Okay? Maybe they don't get credit. Maybe their businesses fail. Let's say there are certain stock prices that I think I would rather have go up or that I would rather have go down. There are a whole set of financial institutions making those decisions that could make that happen. The implications are simply not being appreciated by public, and I don't think by politicians. So all of this stuff about tariffs and all of this stuff about the Fed, to me, is way less important than having your finger on the lever of $150 trillion of assets.
Where is Congress while this threat to the integrity of financial regulation and management of the federal government is unfolding?
Yeah, where is Congress? Do we have a Congress? I don't know. So even if they're not interested in the financial regulation part, what about the independence of monetary policy? What are their views on the tariffs? All of these actions are being taken because there's a declaration of an emergency. Congress could say, no, there's no emergency, and take back those powers. Where is Congress? I don't know. Where is Congress?
Well, I think there's a partisan divide. The Republicans are in control of both houses. They are not likely to develop any initiatives that the president doesn't approve of because they're political creatures and he's got political influence as well as this potential financial influence. And so they're keeping their heads down. Yeah,
that's what the senator from Alaska, Barbara Makowski, I'm maybe pronouncing her name wrong. But she in an interview, I think this week, said that she was afraid, that we're all afraid.
What do you have to say to people who are afraid or who represent people who are afraid? We are all afraid. Okay? It's quite a statement. And I'll tell you, I'm oftentimes very anxious myself about using my voice because retaliation is real. And that's not right. But I've got to figure out how I can do my best to help the many who are so anxious and are so afraid.
Of the retribution that would come to them if they opposed the president's policy.